All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join our first webinar in our customer-centric series today. We're going to start things off with a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. So here at Front, we are passionate about how we treat our customers. Hopefully, our customers who are tuning in today would agree, and helping customers communicate better. That's because we are a customer-centric company at our core and have built a product to advance that mission in other companies. From what we've seen, companies are the most successful when they can align everything they're doing to what's best for the customer. With that foundation, it's much easier for sales and support to then deliver an amazing experience to customers instead of having to fight battles internally. We'll be diving into some guidelines and best practices for great customer communication, some personal stories, and throughout the talk, I'll also suggest some tips that you can bring back to your team to help them become more customer-centric. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm Anderson, the first customer success manager here at Front. I manage onboarding and engagement for more than 1,400 accounts, including some of you, and spend 50% of my time actively talking and learning from our customers. Beyond the day-to-day work of working with customers, I also manage some of our customer success programs, like our user guides, onboarding emails, and tips of the week. I help our customers get the most out of Front, and I'm excited to share my experiences with you today. So we have a good number of folks who are tuning in but don't use Front yet. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of what Front is. Front is a shared inbox for teams that brings all of your communication channels into one place. You can set up channels for text messages through Twilio, chat providers like Smooch or Intercom, social media accounts like your Facebook and Twitter as well as your bread and butter shared email addresses like team @ support @ or contact @. With all of these messages then coming into one shared platform, your team can then be sure that every message is accounted for. We have automated rules and an integrations platform that makes it easy for you to then keep a clear inbox for your team. Now, onto the 7 best practices for customer-centric communication. Here are 7 principles that we follow at Front every day to help build long-lasting relationships with our customers. If you have any questions or comment at any point, please let us know in the chat box. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar and would love to hear from you. So kicking things off with our first principle, be transparent. Transparency is one of our core values here at Front and helps build strong relationships with customers. One area where companies often lack that transparency is when delivering bad news. Delivering bad news is tough. No one's going to argue with that. But from what I've seen, customers always appreciate candid responses. That level of honesty will help you earn their trust. Now, for every principle, I'll also share a scenario that I experienced here at Front. That way you can better contextualize the practical tips that I'll share in the next slide on a real situation you and your team might be experiencing today or might experience in the future. Now, this is a really great example of a time where I had to share bad news. A customer was trying to use a feature that wasn't available on their plan, and in order to add it, they would need to upgrade, which would cost them some money. So here's what I do. First, acknowledge their situation. Recognize that you're not going to be able to tell them what they want to hear from you. So begin by acknowledging that and setting expectation for the rest of the message. If you're suggesting they upgrade, then explain the value beyond just enabling what they're trying to do, but what other features or other benefits they'll get from upgrading. This level of proactiveness may help your customers see additional value they didn't realize before. Now, the third point is to be cautious about how to use emojis and exclamation points. You don't want to be over the top positive, but using positive language and sometimes some humor can help with diffusing the situation. If emojis aren't on brand for your company, just don't use them. But you'll notice that we use a ton of them here at Front in Matilda's newsletters or in my tips of the week. And the last one here is don't just shut down the email chain. End with something like, is there anything else I can help with? That way, even if you're not delivering the news they want to hear, you can keep an open dialogue with the customer. And who knows, maybe it can lead to other opportunities as well. All right, the second thing I'd focus on is being proactive, something I alluded to in one of our previous tips. Try to set up workflows so you're not answering multiple follow-up questions. This way, you save time, and you can also make for better customer experience. With every message you send, think about what new question or questions it could raise for the customer, or what they could still be unsure of. Try to address those topics in the message ahead of time. Now, an example of something I faced and a way to show why being proactive is important is when we launched a new feature, especially one that changed the core product, like adding a new inbox setup flow. I got a ton of questions from our customers and they were confused. For me, it's critical that I help them get back to being proactive as quickly as, or sorry, helping them become more productive as quickly as possible, as inboxes are an important part of their workflow. So here's how I'd handle a situation like that. First, I try to be as specific as possible. It can really pay off to invest in writing a detailed template that I can then modify and personalize it for the customer and then fire off to a bunch of responses quickly. Secondly, linking to help articles where they can read more on their own is useful. But be sure to not just send them the help article, but also include important information for them in the email. It can be frustrating to get responses from someone who just points you to a long article if you feel like it's not answering your question or is really hard to understand. Now, a great way to explain a complex topic quickly in a message is one of my favorites, using screenshots or GIFs, because images are powerful. That's why I use one in every tip of the week email I send. Now, in addition to images, bulleted and numbered lists can be really useful, especially because it can help make long instructions really digestible for their users. And it'll most likely allow your customers to then read through the content as opposed to actually reaching out to you and then trying to schedule some more time and taking time away from your day-to-day. Now, moving on to the third rule, this is an extension of being transparent, but it is one of the most important ones that I want to call out, knowing when to say no. As much as you like to, you're not going to be able to solve every problem that comes your way. Accepting that and then figuring out how to push back on customers is similar to transparency. It's critical to building that strong relationship where customers can actually trust you. If you're in a position where you need to say no to a customer request, the key is figuring out how to say it gracefully. The three things I focus on are the reasoning behind why something isn't possible, potential alternatives to what they're trying to do, and any additional resources where they can learn more about their issues or options. Now, the most common way this comes up for me is when customers want to change a core part of our product or how it works. Email and inbox workflows are so custom that sometimes customers want things to be built specifically for them, but that's just not possible. We work very hard to make sure Front is as customizable as possible through rules and our APIs for custom integrations, but sometimes I just have to say no. So to make saying no easier, this is what I do. For tough product questions especially, I'll draft up a response and share it with our marketing and product teams to make sure I'm aligned with the rest of the team. The same method then applies to pricing questions and your growth and account teams, for example. Having a consistent message for your customer that's grounded in all the facts can really be helpful. Now, I'm also always evolving my canned responses. When I send a message that goes over really well, I make note of it and see if there's any context or content that I can pull from it and use in other messages. Now, the same also goes for the other side, which is when a message goes over poorly. When a customer reacts badly to something, I then definitely want to figure out what could have triggered that reaction, and so to make sure that I don't use it again in my other messages. Now, most importantly is to apologize for the news or the frustration, but not the policy or the reason behind it. You can't solve every problem, and there will be times where you're not able to solve things for the customer in a satisfying way. The best thing that you can do at that point is be as helpful as possible by providing them with an explanation as well as any potential alternatives for them. Moving on to rule 4, adapt your channel. The fourth principle, adapting to your channel, is geared towards one of the major trends we're seeing in customer-facing teams today, multi-channel support. Companies want customers to be able to reach them anytime, anywhere, which means you also need to be accessible anytime and anywhere for them. It can be hard enough to manage customer messages across just one channel. So how do you then do that for multiple email addresses, SMS channels, web and in-app chat, plus phone calls and social media? What works best is to make sure you stay mindful of the channels you're using and mirror your customer's expectation as much as possible. If a customer is sending along a detailed email, they probably want the same back from you. If they're sending you a quick SMS, they probably want to hear back from you immediately. Be concise and conscious of the social expectations of the channels your customers are using. Now, an example of this, which is a pretty universal scenario, is when you're dealing with multi-channel support, how can you then stay organized and make sure no messages fall through the crack? Something that we're all trying to solve for. Now, tips to do this. Obviously, I'm going to plug in Front here. The strongest use case is to use and invest in a tool like Front, which helps consolidate all of your channels into one shared inbox, connecting your multiple email addresses, multiple SMS lines, multiple social media accounts for your various teams. While other help desk and communication platforms attempt to be multi-channel, Front is really the best I've tried. Whether you've set up a multi-channel inbox in Front or are dealing with separate systems, you need to be aware of your response time. Circling back to the idea of social expectation across channels, when a customer sends a response via your web chat, they probably expect to hear back from you pretty quickly. If they shoot you an email, then you can let them know, maybe perhaps use the autoresponder and let them know that you'll respond in 24 hours, but you can probably be slower with your responses in that case. Aligning the customer's expectation is critical in determining the experience that customer will ultimately have with your organization. Now, lastly, work on systems that afford your teams the ability to increase your response time. Front has canned responses built in natively, but you can also use tools like Text Expander to do the same thing outside of Front. All right, rule 5, don't use jargons. Be real with your customers and don't use jargons. There's nothing more frustrating than getting an email where you don't understand the terms they're using or feel like they're just hand waving around their answers with filler words. So just don't do it. Use words and phrases that are relatable and useful for your customers. They'll appreciate your tone and language and feel like they can actually talk to you because you're not an unrelatable robot. So, an example of this, pulling from one of my past experiences, I know it can be tough to get outside the mindset of your company. You probably have a few words or terms that you use internally that customers might not get, but it can be hard to describe things without them. How can you then explain that concept or part of that product that you only have internal words for? So, first of all, try to scan every message you send with a customer's eye and define and remove anything that's not immediately clear for them. If you use special terms for your product, provide an explanation or link out to helpful articles that can help explain this in more depth than the email. I always take the time to then edit twice. I first do a quick scan for typos and errors, which everyone should do, and then I do a second read through with the specific goal of removing extraneous words, confusing phrases, and jargony terms. Having this specific second revision is an investment of time, but I can almost always find things to remove that make my email clearer and easier to understand for them. And finally, it's powerful to then level set your message with the customer you're talking to. Are you emailing with a power user who's really familiar with your product, or are you just talking to someone who's just getting started on your product? Make sure the content of your email suits the customer you're emailing with so that it feels personal and can actually be useful for them. All right, this is a funny image one here. Don't ghost your customers. Something I always say is that sending the first email is only 25% of the job. The remaining 75% of the job is chasing and following up. Getting back to every customer on every conversation is absolutely critical. There's nothing worse than going silent in the middle of a conversation when a customer is expecting to hear back from you. You can do everything else right, but the make or break is simply being there for your customers. Set expectations about when you'll next reach out or what you're doing behind the scenes so they feel like you're taking care of their question and not just dropping the ball. So here's another example for you. Say you're a solo account manager responsible for 1,400 accounts. How can you then make sure you don't leave any customer hanging? Now, as I mentioned, the most powerful thing you can do is set expectations. Help your customers understand the actions you're taking behind the scenes and any complexities that you need to sort out on your own or on the back end. Don't wait until you have the answer to communicate your plan. Sometimes it's useful to have an autoresponder that feels personal to let your customer know when they'll first hear from you, but keep letting them know throughout the process when they'll hear from you next, and a potential timeline for a full resolution is very, very powerful for them. You need to also make sure to stick to that timeline and not leave them hanging. Front makes it easy to set reminders and snooze messages to follow up automatically, but you can also do something similar with a tool like Boomerang. If you need to hand off messages to another team or teammate, make sure the handoff is clear, not just for the teammate, but also for the customer. You can use assignments in front to define ownership behind the scenes. You can also CC or a new point of contact into a thread with the customer if you're outside of front. If you have access to analytics or tracking of your messages, those kinds of metrics or response time and resolution times can be very powerful and is a really good way for you to focus and improve over time. Front has an out-of-the-box dashboard that makes it easy for anyone to do that, but you need to make sure that everyone is able to work with, everyone has access to those analytics. If you don't have access to analytics, see if you can work with your analytics team on maybe producing a custom reporting if you're not using Front. All right, rule 7, solve problems at scale. Everyone knows that scale is this term that's thrown around a lot in tech and startups. But what I mean here by scale is a reflection of a high volume or high growth environment, maybe both. If you're dealing with thousands of customer messages every week or doubling your customer base every year, it's critical that you do 2 things. First, even in the middle of all the craziness, set yourself up for long-term success. Establish systems and processes that will grow your team and business rather than just using short-term solutions you end up revamping every quarter, every 6 months, or every year. It's just a waste of time. So invest in it. Secondly, try to solve for those high order problems. We'll talk more about this in the example, but think of every customer question or complaint you receive as a symptom of a broader issue. Try to then identify those broader issues and solve them to prevent these questions and complaints from coming up in the first place. So a great example of this is if you receive, let's say, 100 emails per week about a variety of issues with your billing system, failed payments, bugs during account setups, or potentially confusing workflows. How can you then handle the message volume that you're getting quickly, while also then trying to solve the broader problem with your billing system? First, to deal with the high volume of messages, you can use a lot of the tips we've already talked about so far, like creating canned responses or templates responses for common issues, investing in making explanatory screenshots or GIFs that help explain this a much more digestible way for your customers. You should then also invest in technologies that help your team work more efficiently and reduce the amount of times they have to context switch. This could mean integrating with your custom database or between tools, or using a platform like Front that brings everything together in one place. Now, as much as you can, tie issues to business impact, NPS scores, upsell, churn metrics. These can help with prioritizing the broader issues if you have anecdotes or even more complete data tying an issue like bugs in your billing system to then unhappy customers or losing or lost revenue. You have then unique access to your customers. So try and surface their feedback as directly as you can. A great way to do this is to track feedback with tags and review reports with your product team to see how frequently issues are coming up. They'll appreciate the visibility and the wealth of customer feedback you get, while customers will be happy that you're really advocating for them internally. So just to recap on the 7 best practices here at Front for great customer communication. We're also going to have a Q&A session shortly, so please submit any questions or thoughts you have on these for that discussion. I hope that these set of best practices feels balanced and realistic to you. They've served me really well, but would love to hear any thoughts you have on them in the Q&A session, whether they've worked really well for you in your company, or if there are other principles that you'd like to share with us. I'm also happy to share more examples with you in the Q&A session as well. So just to recap on Front, I know we've talked a lot about Front over the course of the webinar, but I wanted to close with another screenshot of the platform. Empowering customer-centric teams is definitely something that we are very passionate about, and it's something that you'll see infused in the product and in the features that we are launching in the platform. We've built your inbox, but better. So on the left-hand side, Front pulls together all the channels you're subscribed to, like your shared email, your SMS, Twilio, Twitter, all of these things together in one place. But we also have a personal workspace where you can then manage your private addresses or any messages assigned to you. Otherwise, you'll see what feels like a familiar inbox with the collaborative features you're used to from other SaaS platforms. There's no need to create duplicate threads or messy chains or CCs, BCCs, forwards, when you can directly mention and collaborate with your teammate. On the far right-hand side, you then have a plugin panel that surfaces context from other tools like Salesforce or HubSpot directly into your inbox, so you don't have to context switch as much. If you're interested in learning more about Front, I'm happy to connect with you or connect you with our other teammates as well, and to give you a better walkthrough and more in-depth walkthrough. Just let us know after the webinar. You can definitely reach out to us at team@frontapp.com as well. So having learned a bit more about Front and how we think about customer-centric communication, I'd now love to open it up for questions. We've got a ton or a few over the course of the webinar, but would love to add any comments or questions in the chat box if you have any. All right. So here I can see a question. I just use email for support and account management, but I'm thinking of starting to use SMS and in-app chat. Do you have any tips for what works best for those channels? Yes, so tips about SMS and in-app chat. Both of those are definitely more accessible ways of communicating with your customer. With in-app chat, you have that fast response time for stuck customers, as well as being able to engage with those customers directly on your website when they need it. Now, SMS doesn't feel as personal, but is well suited for customer communication sort of in more real time as well. So I definitely do suggest that if you are thinking about using and leveraging in-app chat or SMS as part of your business workflow, to do that, because your customers, you're basically just allowing your customers more opportunities to then connect with you at a faster pace. All right. How do you combine messages from different channels into one lead? So this is a really great question. So in Front, you have the ability to have multiple channels. And if it's all about email, Front has a feature that allows you to actually merge conversations. And so what happens is if you have multiple email threads that are about the same thing but are actually on different conversations, you can merge those conversations together and then potentially push those conversations into Salesforce or whatever CRM tool that you're using. All right, another question. I thought your rule on being proactive was really great and something I'd like to try out as well. What are some other strategies you've used to be proactive with customers? All right, so like I said, I've been running the customer success programs for quite a while here at Front, and some things that we've seen customers really respond well to and really like and enjoy is, one, an onboarding workflow where every customer that joins gets put through some kind of drip campaign where they can then be instructed and learn more and familiarize themselves with the product. Now, another thing that we've instituted is tips of the week. Tips of the week are a really great way to engage your customers on a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly basis to help them understand some tips and tricks they might not necessarily know and learn on their own. If you have any issues with discoverability on your website, this is also another way for them to then learn about these awesome tips. So we have another question here. Would love to hear another story about how you dealt with a challenging customer situation. All right, so oftentimes you'll have customers who really see the vision of your product, but the product isn't yet ready for them, but they want to be a part of the product already. We call those sort of like visionary customers who love those products, but don't necessarily have sort of the product at a state that can support them. So for me, how I've dealt with that sort of challenging situation and to help them become really happy customers is to communicate timelines with them and be proactive in letting them know when timelines change and when features are being released. So a good example of this is I had one of my customers who was essentially had 30 teammates on Front, but was really inactive. They only had one person. And that was because at the time, Front didn't support Office 365, but now we do. And so over the course of the 3 months in which we didn't support Office 365, I was working with them week after week to help them find alternatives for their teams to be able to still leverage their Office 365 emails in Front, and then eventually, after that 3 months, when we did roll out Office 365, we worked up to get all of their messages ported into Front, and then now they actually are using Front for their entire company. So I think that's a really great success story that really highlights how constant communication and being a customer advocate and keeping that customer centric mentality in your workflow will really help shape that customer's experience, even if your product necessarily isn't ready for them. Keeping that sort of touch point, keeping that personalization and that relationship with them will help them stick it through the hard things. And then when your product is ready, help expand to a really great place. All right, from the slide on Front, I'm just going to switch over back to that. You talked about collaborating on a shared inbox. Can you tell me more about how that works? All right, so Front itself is a collaboration platform. So like you can see here on the left-hand side, you have a ton of shared inboxes right there. What Front allows you to do is actually move messages between your shared inbox so the right teams are looking at it. I can't explain how many times this happens where your support teams are working with a customer, and then at some point, because of the great customer experience, that then turns into a sales opportunity. How do you then pass it over to sales and make sure that someone on sales is aware of this opportunity? In Front, you can actually just drag that message from support into sales, but in a traditional sort of Gmail setting, you just forward it over, but you don't actually have that transparency in seeing, did that message get assigned to someone? Can I actually follow along that message to see someone is in fact handling this message in the way that I want them to handle it? Now, also sort of going and looking at the third panel over here, what I call the conversation panel, you can see Sarah here has made a comment that says, I'll follow up with him. He's in the middle of a trial. So we have simple collaboration and commenting capabilities that allows you to connect with your team in line in the conversation without having to context switch. So a good example of this is when customers or potentially when your teams are either using, let's say, a communication chat platform, and someone says, hey, did you get this message that I talked about this? And they go on and on about that conversation. But for you, you have no idea what message they're referring to. So in Front, we solve this by allowing your team to actually comment and mention people, looping them into conversations without generating more email sort of threads or creating just more email communication that doesn't necessarily have to be there. You can then actually have this conversation in line. It's private to just your team. Figure out what you want to do, what is your plan of action, and then go back to the customer with that solid plan. All right, so I think that is pretty much the end of the questions. We have a quick poll for you. We are, again, like I said, this is the first in our series of customer-centric communication. We would love to learn more about what you're interested in as well. So just select one of these options in the polls, and we're going to gear our next webinar series towards that. Again, if you have any questions or any comments, please feel free to add them in the questions box. This has been a really exciting thing for us to do. We really like to talk to our customers and learn more from you. So if you have any best practices that you think you would like us to share on your behalf, please add them in the questions section as well. All right. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join today's webinar. It was really exciting to have all of you here, and we look forward to having you join our next webinar. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you.